Respect to the man they call Optical.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello. I'm Matt, known as Optical as well. My screen's a little off, so some stuff goes over there, too bad. Okay, I've been making music for 25 years, roughly, professionally. I started when I was 15, which is a little longer ago, but what can I say? I've always loved making music, and I've always loved the idea of sound and trying to understand it. So I'm going to try and give you some of my understanding, also some tips and techniques and so on and so forth. Right, so listen to what I say and then completely ignore it. Well, why is that? Basically, you've got to have a bit of an unhealthy disrespect for people teaching you, because the idea of what you're trying to do is something new from what they have done. So you don't want to copy exactly what I'm telling you, but maybe hopefully it'll inspire you to do some of the exploration that I've tried in my career. So yeah, listen to my tips, but then do the opposite maybe tomorrow, and it might help you. Right, getting to know how to manipulate every aspect of a piece of audio. That means, you know, the shape of the waveforms, how things interlock with each other, how two sounds will add together. These are really important things to understand really well if you want to make music, because you're going to avoid a lot of the pitfalls of producers there when you can hear their music isn't well made. So I'm going to go through some of that right now. Okay, this is what I'm going to be dealing with in my talk. If we have time, I'm going to try and go through all of these things one by one and give you a bit of a tip on each one. So let's start with audio editing. You've got to understand a waveform. Well, this wiggly thing here is kind of a waveform, you know, but basically a better way of explaining it, I guess. This is my strange diagram here. This is the speaker. It's like a big air plunger, so it's pushing air back and forth at you like that, boom, boom, boom. And it's trying to follow this waveform as much as it possibly can, which is your song, to recreate the sound of it. Well, obviously, if you do something wild in this shape here, this speaker is not going to be able to exactly match that. So you've got to try and avoid having strange spikes or weird shapes that are physically not possible, especially straight lines. That's just, no one thing can be in one place and another place at the same time. It's just not physically possible. So these are the ways that you can avoid some kind of strange noises in your tracks by having a look at your waves at the end, making sure you don't have any of those going on. Right, so here's it moving, just a quick example, trying to keep up, but it's not doing that well, obviously. It's doing its best. So, you know, no big chunky squares that just came through there, probably wouldn't have been able to do that. So try and avoid that if possible, especially flat square waves. They're never going to play back right and probably damage your mix quite a lot. Okay, moving on. This is a standard waveform display that I look at every day. It's from Adobe Audition. And I'll play you a bit of audio from this clip here so you can kind of see what's going on, hopefully. Okay, well that's from Chub Rub, one of my tracks with Ed Rush. Just quickly, you can kind of see these shapes here. This is a snare here. You can tell by the really tight shape there. This is a kick drum here. It's like I've got a very tight shape at the beginning, but then here you've got a lot of sub going on here, so it starts to open out. What else can I say? These are the front of the kick drums. You see, they've got a very solid amount of frequency in all ranges, all the way down from the tops to the bottom. So you get you get very dense, but with an overall kind of wave going through it like that. So that's one way of looking at it. You've got to understand these waveforms. You've got to be able to read them and sort of know what's going on to get a good mix down. That, by the way, is a master file. You can see how completely destroyed it is. You know, I flatlined it a couple of times. It's gone to Bo as well. He's probably done another couple of decibels of slamming. In actual fact, modern gear these days can actually go over this peak here without changing shape now. So even though you see a red light, sometimes not even distorting, you know. So you can get an extra bit of headroom even with a red clip light coming on. Let's go and move on to the next one. These three displays are the things that I use to analyse my tracks with. I'm going to go through each one now. You can have a look at what I use every day. Right, this is a dozer, track dozer. A couple of things to notice. This one here is obviously the bass frequency here. You can see it's quite predominant there. Okay, and then this one here is kind of where the kick drum's hitting on the 100 hertz kind of frequency here. And we've got my bottom end of my snare, you can kind of see right on this bar here, that's where the weight and the power of the snare are coming in. And this shape here has kind of got a little bit of a roundedness to it, which I tend to sort of go for. This really high top end, I'm trying to roll it off a little bit here. And also keep a little bit of the scoop there, because that just keeps it nice and clear when you're listening to it. Okay, let's move on. This one called the wavy line. It's basically the same as the last one we were looking, but it's just an overall graph shape. And again, you can see the bass power up here. Whoops, let's go back to that. Hold on. There we are again. Right, you can see the bass power here at this end. Same here, that's probably a snare, that little lump there. These are kind of the various hi-hat parts. You can see their frequencies jumping out here. Again, there's a roll-off at the top end, which is going to keep it nice and bass heavy. If you have an awful lot of really high-end detail, it's just like dog whistle. You're not gonna hear it. So it's better to kind of get rid of it if possible, because it destroys the power of the song quite a lot. Now, the most useful display I have, in my opinion, is this one. It's a little bit complicated at first to understand. Here's the track plate. Right, let's have a look at this here. Obviously you could hear just then, that was the kind of bongos there hitting. Boom, 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 boom. Here, this is the bass notes, and they're very predominant. The more sort of green and yellow this display is, the louder it is. The more black or purple it is, the quieter it is. So let's have a look at some of the things that are going on here. We've definitely got shapes in the top end, and so it's not just a wall of top end, there's kind of coming in and out. So that's keeping your dynamic and your rhythm going. There's quite a lot of gaps between drums here, where I've tried to clear out the frequencies, and that keeps your dynamic really strong as well. Having a lot of shape, which later on I'll try and show you how to do that. And what else can I say? These here are kick drums, and I'm going to show you the shape of kick drums and how you can blend them into bass. A lot of people use side chaining. I don't really go for that. I try to keep all the frequencies the same level and just match them as well as possible. So, you know, it's up to you though, which way you want to do it. Right, I'm trying to skip through this quickly because I'll get on to some of the more interesting stuff later on. Here again is an example of what I was talking about when you've got two samples that hit one after the other and you haven't taken into account what's going to happen here in this straight line here. There's no way a speaker can start here and then exactly the same time end up there. So if I saw this in my song after I printed it, I'd go back and I'd try and work out how I can make this shape blend into this shape for whatever these two things are. I might crossfade them, I might envelope them. I'll try and show you a bit of that. Here we go. Right, sorry. Start and end points at 0. This is something that I'm really fanatical about. Every time I cut a sample up or a piece of audio, I'm always looking to line up the end and the beginning right on the 0 point here, because that's going to avoid a lot of these strange overlaps and things cutting into each other. And I'm also going to use an envelope, and this is a tiny, tiny fraction of audio here. So this isn't a big change here, but what you can see is happening is the end of the sample, instead of being a straight cut-off line, is now shaped back into a nice rounded bit. And it's kind of going on the opposite of this side, nice and rounded at the beginning instead of flat straight down. That's going to remove any clicks or pops you get in your mix. And those things can be inaudible a lot of the time, but especially in modern computers, they're going to trip your compressors like wildly. And you'll be going, why is this thing sounding all like hollow, kind of knocked out? And that is often the reason why. If you just get rid of those, all of a sudden, you know, your peaks aren't half as high and it's all nice and smooth. Okay, now this is some volume editing I'm going to show you. This is sort of the detail that I go into sometimes when I'm getting really deep and I want to make something work. This is a kick drum sample. And as you can see here, I've drawn these two green lines because that's basically, this is the speaker in the center. And this is out as pretty much as far as it can go. And over here, when it's on the right-hand side, it's going a lot further than it is on the left-hand side. So the speaker's going to move further back than it does further forward. And the best thing is they're just moving at equal distances from each other. So the way I correct that is by doing this. I select the bit that's too high, and I basically use a volume scaling plugin, which is just doing everything these days. It's very simple. turn it down until it's the same height as the other side, and I'm doing it with the second one here. You can see in a minute when it's done, this is before and after. You can see the shape changing there to be more equal after I fixed it. Now you might think, why is he bothering doing that? Well, basically, those kind of things are the things that make really good mixes, because you're being really precise, you're not having anything left to chance. You're making all your shapes and waves exactly the right shape and size. And this is another example here using envelopes. This envelope here was done in Cubase, and in Cubase you can set I can make this envelope all kinds of wiggly shapes in there, not just this standard round thing. So you can use it for creating LFOs, you can use it for just, this is a kick drum here, I think you can hear this now. What that is, the long one is the first one, the second one I've used the envelope on. Now why would I want to do that? Well, in drum and bass, that's a kick from a house tune, but I quite like it and I want to use it in my drum and bass tune. But this is actually a whole load of bass here and I want a bass line, so I don't want all of that. I want to get rid of it, so I've just used this envelope to make it basically shorter, but not completely stop. It kind of tails away like a real kick drum does. So that's a quick review of audio editing. Let's move on. Hopefully, yes, drum design. Okay, this is going to be complicated and it's really hot up here, so apologies. Right, let's have a look. This is a kick drum. I used to be a drummer, so I know quite a lot about drums, and I think learning about real drums helps you to make computer drums. So having a good understanding of the parts of the drum helps you to make your own kick drums, your own snares, or possibly make layers make more sense to you. So you've got the initial hit here, which is usually just quite a short knock sound, and then you've got the front skin vibrating, which is quite a mid-rangey sound, and as it vibrates, it slowly goes down in pitch as it slows down. And then finally, the back skin, which is very subby, is going to add a total bass note to the end. So let's have a look at that in my spectrogram. Sorry, it's a little faint there, but you can see in a kick drum when you look at it, the tone is going down from really down from really high all the way down to the sub, and that's a shape that you'll always see with a kick drum. This one here, this downward motion. And if you look in here, this front bit is the knock. You can see it's got a lot of high and mid in it. That's why it's moving really fast here. And this second bit is the skin kind of moving. You can see the shape starts to slow down. And then finally, this is the sub bit of the kick, which is the back part of the skin. So it's made up of 3 parts. And then some of this here is just the reverb of the kick, some of the air from the room. There's really a lot of the actual dry signal would just be like that. It wouldn't have all this in it. Okay, let's move on to the snare drum. It's a pretty similar idea. You've got a knock at the beginning, which is the stick hitting. Then you've got the drum reverberating on the top and then the bottom, exactly like a kick drum. The only difference is you've got a coil of wire underneath the snare drum, and that adds this kind of sizzly noise, and that's the difference between a snare drum and a normal drum. It's the snare underneath. So when you know all these things, you can kind of really control your snare drum and your track. Let's have another look. We've got this kind of downwards travelling thing again. It's not as pronounced as it is in a kick drum, but it is actually, as the thing slows down, it goes down in frequency as the drum slows down in reverberation. And here you've got the knock of the drum, and also a lot of the sizzle from the snare comes out in here, really high frequencies all the way through. That's why it's quite thick compared to the kick drum. But you can see underneath, there's still a good solid mid-range wave going through it, and that's keeping the weight part of it, which is here around 200 or 300. You won't want to go down below that particularly, or it'll just get lost in the mix. Right, finally, cymbals, they're all pretty much the same. This is a hi-hat, but all cymbals are the same idea. There's an initial knock and then a sizzle from the cymbals moving, and then the sound of the room. And here's a cymbal here. You can see not much going on down in the bass end, which is good. You want it to be nice and clear. And then lots of good solid top end frequency all the way through it, and some mids as well, so otherwise it'll just go very thin. Right, so choosing a loop to work with. When you're taking a drum sample, and I've done this for years, is if I like a break, I'm not just going to go and take that sample of it. I go out and I have a look all over the net or records, and I try and get 10 different versions and figure out which one is the best starting point, the most solid version of that recording. You'll find a lot of old records have been cleaned up by other people, and so you might find 10 versions of a break, but it's really worth sort of looking around to find the really best one. And each time I'm picking something, I'm looking for a specific aspect about it to use in my track. The initial beat, I'm going to be looking for a solid core of sound with a powerful and solid kick and snare, something that's going to drive through the beat. And then after that, I'm looking for things to add the rhythm to it. So I'm looking for mid-rangey, shuffly things, or very clear, smooth top ends and rides that add to the top of the beat, or maybe just unique hits that I've never heard before. So now I am going to move on to Cubase, which is one of the programs that I work with. So if you just give me a second to load that up. Sorry a bit about this, but I'm going to be running Studio One as well, so I can't have them all at once or my computer will just probably run away and die. Fingers crossed right now for everything. Here we go. I must say I tried this out a few times this week and it didn't work, so a bit like this keyboard I brought with me. It was working this morning, now it doesn't want to work, so maybe if we cheer it later on it will come back. Okay, and where are we? Yes, it's loading, thank God. Okay, right, so I've prepared this little track for you guys. It's not a whole song, but I'm going to run through. The reason I've done this and not show you a song is because I can totally remember every little step I did because I've done this all in the last few weeks. So first things first, this is the break that I've decided I'm going to try and play around with. So let's hear that. Just make sure it's not. The reason I've chosen that, I like the ridey, cowy bell things or whatever, and it's got a lot of dynamics, pretty good sounding beat. What I generally do is I don't like working with stereo audio very much. I like to make my own stereo and things, so I try and make most things, my sound sources on mono sound, and then create my own space later using effects, which I'll go into later on. So what I've done here is I've taken the right side off of that sample, and this is just the left side on its own. Hopefully, if I go slightly more focused now. You know, these old stereo recordings, they used to pan things really hard left and right, and you find that that's going to really destroy the power of your beat a lot when you're working with it. So the first thing I have done here is I've gone and cut all of the different parts up, and I've been very, very careful about that. It's especially in this second stage here. I've really gone inside and I've made sure that even though you can't see here, they're cutting at 0. And they end nicely, and also I've started to kind of put them into a shape where I can play the drum beat, which is this next stage here. I've kind of moved them all around, so I've got them. That's just a cut up sample now. And here I've gone in each hit. You can see here I've done my envelope thing. See on the ends of this tiny little bit, just to make them all rounded off, nothing sticking out. Done it to every single hit, so now I've got them all completely cut up, separate. They don't have to be together right now. Now here I'm reconstituting them into pretty much the original sample. Let's have a look here. So now, sorry, let's get down the bar. The first thing I've realised is I don't really like that thing on the front there, and I cut a bit from later in the beat here, which is just another kick drum. So I've kind of replaced that one with here. So now I'm looking for the strongest hits in the beat. I'm going to maybe take out some of the snares that are odd shapes, and maybe some of the hi-hats that have got weird stuff in, and hopefully just be left with the bits that are working the best, and I'm going to put them into an order which I like here at this point, I think. Okay, so that's there. Now this is where I got rid of that front bit because I had enough. And yeah, I've also gone in here and I'm changing the volume slightly of each hit to kind of be at the levels that I think are appropriate, especially in this final version here. Let's have a look at that because that's probably where most of it's going on. Right, you see here, this is probably something to talk about right now. Let's just open this up a bit. This is my hit here that I'm putting in this place here. And what I've done is I've manually lined it up with my quantized point. I've actually made it start before. This is where the hit is quantized at. I've added this bit before it, and then I've crossfaded it into the previous sample. Now look what's happening here is there's no strange cut point. It's actually very well integrated with the bit before. Drake was talking about that kind of thwack before the hit of a drum. And what I'm in effect doing is crossfading that into the end of the previous sample so that I'm getting that kind of whoosh like that. And that way it's not sounding all computerized and cut like a lot of people's drums do. So I've gone through on each hit and I've tried to work out, look there again, see there's no strange square shape there, it's just a nice rounded, and it's keeping this bass wave, which unfortunately is probably a lot of the power of the beat, it's keeping it nice and smooth all the way through the whole thing. So this is the final version, all cross-faded. Let's have a look at that. In here it's pretty smooth considering it's been speeded up nearly double, and I haven't used any pitch shifting or any time stretching, turning all of that off, because this might look like a really long way round to basically end up with one channel, which you'll see in a minute. I'm using this in a beat. I actually chopped half of it out. I just wanted to use it for the ridey part of it. But the point is, if you go to this level of detail, it's going to be that 5 or 10% better than just taking a loop out of a sample pack, which is time stretched into your song and you can just drop it in. Yeah, that's really easy. Good for creativity. I might even use that at the beginning when I'm making a song, chuck a load of loops in, and then when I'm sure I want to use them, then I'll go and do this to make sure that they're perfect. So that's how I cut up a break anyway. Now I'm going to move on and show you a bit about how I make a drum beat overall. So we'll shut that off for now and close it. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see up here, but right, so this is my beat. Down here is that ridey thing that I've just made, and you'll hear there's not much left of it now, so you'll probably wonder why I did it, but basically just the middle of the beat now, but it's got the ridey bit I like. And so I'm going to start off by using a kick, and to be honest with you, I'll show you some of the channel settings here, but I bet you there's probably not a lot going on. Let me pull up my mixer so you can have a look at that. Let's see. Okay. On this, I'm basically, I don't go for a lot of EQ. I was just watching Drake's interesting talk, and he was doing all these wild EQ shapes. Maybe it's because I'm old school, but all I ever really used an EQ for in the past was kind of like overall brightening or overall adding of weight. I didn't usually use it as a sculpting tool too much, because I find that I get much more out of distortion and saturation than I do with EQs as a result. So I'm really interested in all these plugins that are like simulating what desks do. Let's have a look at this one. I'm really into this one. Oh, it's come off on the other screen. Let's go over here. This is basically just a simulation of a desk by Slate Digital, and I'm really not doing very much with it. I've turned it on and I've chosen which desk to use. There's 5 different types there, and I've done a tiny bit of drive, but it's actually doing something without really turning the knobs. And really you don't want to change the simulation, because the simulation is what you're after. So these drive and input knobs are changing it to an unnatural setting. So I tend to not use them too much. I just put that on, and it gives me an overall saturation. It kind of clips some of the funny spiky frequencies that are sticking out of that particular hit. On here I've also got Brits on channel there. It's exactly the same deal. I'm using 2 of them, so it's kind of like a double saturation on that. So let's have a quick listen to this. This is just the weight kick drum. So you can hear it's very short, it's very weighty. That's going to be like the main thing that I'm going to build the beat on top of. So you need something really solid underneath. Then here I'm just going to, I think if I read that rightly, this is just the top end of a kick that I've sliced off the bottom from, and it's just to add some air to the top of the kick. What we've got here, just a really plain hi-hat sample, and I haven't really done anything. I think I've just put one saturation plug-in. In here it's not massively top-endy. I quite like mid-rangey hi-hats for the centre of the beat. keep it all really chunky, and then try and add the top end to the core beat once you've made it. And this is just a little offbeat kind of hat thing. Give it a bit of groove kind of thing. Right, so onto the snare. We've got, I think that says light snare, so I'm going to avoid that because that's probably not even on it. Alright, so this is just a snare sample I use a lot. Really modern, sort of, let's have a good look at it here. It's a really modern snare sound. It's got a very flat response there. You can see it's not kind of going down here in volume. It's solid all the way along there. So that's the key thing. You see that wave moving through it? That means it's got a really good 200 hertz sort of weight to it. You want to see that, you know, that's important to see that there. This light snare, I'm not sure how this is going to end up sounding in here, so I might turn it on in a minute, but we'll see. And then finally, I've just got like a shaker loop, which is just a layered thing of several loops that I use. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the beat there. Let's listen to it all together. See how it sounds. Maybe rubbish, I don't know, because I was listening to headphones last night. Let's see now. I'll get more on. Here we go. Right, so this is them all combined. It's got lots of life in the top end. You can hear that ride thing is keeping it from sounding like too computery and static, but it's still got the weight of the kick and snare, so I've chosen really powerful kicks and snares to go underneath all of my softer hi-hat stuff. And let's have a look at the mixer. This here is, sorry, there's a bit of a screen in the way there, but let's have a look. Everything is bussed to this drum group here, this one. And on there, it's probably hard for you to see. This top one here is camel fat, which I'm sure if any of you watched the audio's tutorial will know about this trick. That is, and it, you know, mate, there's a lot of people that will go, oh no, it's just like total like cutting it off. There's nothing special. But I've tried millions of ways of limiting things. That is a dead cut off at 0. It won't ever clip. But for some reason, it also has an effect of thickening the top end. For myself, I think it sounds a lot more nicer. I don't really like that spiky computer audio. It's really bright. I just think it does amazing things. And it's also glues all of the drum samples slightly together. Maybe they're a little less hi-fi than they were before, but they definitely sound like more one thing. And if you think about recording a band, for instance, you have the drummer there and you have the guitarist over there and the vocalist there. They're all in their own space, and in the computer it's quite easy to fill a whole room with drums or fill a whole room with a vocal and leave no space left for anything else. So this kind of gluing and bussing idea is really to take all the separate samples that have come from all these different places and all these different recordings and try and put them all into one space where they just sound like one drum kit or one element in a song. And the other thing that's running on the drum bus, again, is a simulation of a bus. It's actually just Slate Digital again. This Brit N, I believe, is an SSL 4000 console, so you can look that up, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It's just a simulation of the bus. It's gonna, if you ask me what the simulation is, well, partly it's EQ. If you look at it, it kind of rolls off the bottom end because an analog desk really doesn't respond to really low sub frequencies. Drake was talking about, oh, it's so much easier to use an analog desk to solves a lot of issues where you'd have to do side chaining in a computer and stuff like that. I think the real answer to why that is because these voltage circuits really just don't somehow respond to these very low frequencies, so they just tend to leave them out, which helps you a lot with all this gluing and cutting. You don't have to high cut things as much as you do in a computer. It removes a lot of the muddiness at the bottom end. And also a kick and a bass sound can have real problems together in a computer world with phasing, but for some reason in an analog desk, I don't know the specifics of why, but it used to just happily glue them together. You could hear the kick, you could hear the bass sound, you didn't need to sort of push one down against the other, which is really what sidechaining is doing, is getting rid of the bass where there's bass in the kick. It's a good idea, I guess, but what happens is your bass is underneath, it's going like that, instead of real strong notes, which I like, really super strong bass lines. So this simulation thing, I'm getting really into that. I've got a real hope for the future that this in the box mixing will become a lot more like a mixing desk is, where hopefully they'll build all these things into the next doors and you won't have to keep plugging them in. You might just have a switch that says Mackie mixing desk or SSL or something, and it'll just run the simulation on all the channels. That's a request to Steinberg if they ever watch this. So, okay, I think I'm at the end of talking about drums now, so let's just move back to my presentation, give you a quick overview of what's going on next. I'm going to go into bass design. All right, bass fundamentals. Charlie Brake went through quite a lot of them before, but I'm going to go over it, so apologies. Right, you're looking at the most simple form of bass here. So I'm going to switch back to this just for a second so I can pull up my bass sounds because I've got something to play. Here we go. Right, so that is a sub bass. It's distorting a little bit in here, but hey, it is a sub bass sine wave. It's pretty much that wave you're listening to there. It's got no character. It's got lots of power. You can probably hear the whole building shaking when I play this, which is great. I mean, we all want the building to shake when we make a bass line, but we also, if you made every track with that in it, you'd be the most boring producer in the world, probably. So we have to do something to give it character. And the more character we add to this sine wave, the less power it's going to have. So it's a like trade-off of making really interesting bass sounds between the big fundamental wave that's running through it, which is shaking all the big bottom speakers like that, and the various harmonics that you're going to add to it. So let's move on to another shape and we can look at some harmonics. This is your like sort of big, distorted, modern bass sound, hopefully. You can hear those kind of top things, they're like being sawed, you know. It's kind of got a grittiness to the top of it. But what you can see is that it's still got a nice big fundamental wave in there. And, you know, these sound systems, they're split and they're filtered, so the big bass speakers are only really getting this simple wave the whole time. They're not getting all this stuff. That's been sent to the mid-range speakers. So, you know, you've got to be really careful that you make sure that you can see a nice big wave running through every bass note. And it's not all of this kind of uppy, downy, very fast stuff. But you're really just going to get an awful sort of lot of noise in the bottom end. It's not going to be a solid note. So you're looking for big shapes here. All right, let's check the next one. That is, probably isn't going to sound like it, but that is actually just a snippet of the bass from Shape the Future. It's looking at just the fundamental wave of it. I've sort of filtered off a lot of the top so you can see what shape it is. It's basically like a bent sawtooth wave. How you get that is actually, that was made on this thing here, which unfortunately is a little bit temperamental. If you have the sawtooth wave in here just playing back normally and you add another sawtooth wave and detune them slightly, that's the shape you're going to end up with. It's still got a nice like big movement to it, but it's slightly unusual, and so it has a bit more character. That's just a horrible loop of it, by the way. If I put filters on it and did all that, you'd hear how it went in the original track, but I'm trying to just show you the fundamental bass waves at the minute. This one here is just a modern Reese bass. You can definitely hear those sawy tooth sounds running through it, you know, but you've also got a nice big bass wave. So right, that's the fundamental things that are about bass, except for this is just unfortunately very annoying to me. But a fundamental truth is drum and bass, if you want to shake the sound system, your core bass notes really do have to be F, F sharp or G. I know they were talking about E earlier on, I think that's even going low already. And anything below that, you're just not going to hear it at all. So a lot of us do pretty much stick to the core note of the low bass being F or G notes. So it can be a bit restrictive and annoying, but if you stick to it and you do use those notes, you'll be definitely sure that you've got to have a big bass line in your track. So annoying as it is, it's worth doing. Okay, these things are what is going to affect the playback of your bass. So you have to think about the laws of physics. That's basically, speaker might play it back nicely, but then the room might be such a weird shape that it kind of cancels out your bass with a return wave, which phases it out. So you've got to, sometimes you'll play a track and it'll have the best bass line ever, and you go to a club one day and it's just gone, it's disappeared for some weird reason. I don't think there's any real cure to it, but you know, you've just got to be aware, phasing issues, try and stick to this F and G notes. Right, I'm going to, whoops, skipping ahead there. I'm going to make a bass now for you using Cubase. I'm going to show you some of my tips on making bass sounds. So, here we have a bass sound. This was actually, you can have a look here. This started out life as a tabla sample, you know, one of those Indian drum sounds. And myself and Ed Rush were messing around one day and we slowed it right down the sample, and then we're like, wow, that's amazing. So I'll show you kind of what happened after that. This is the sound. Sounds pretty horrible, it's not much of a bass line. I've actually kind of crushed it in the sampler here so you can see it's a very flat response. It's giving it a bit of distortion, but that's the tabla sound. Now what I've done here, let's go down here, is I'm just going to load up Contact, because I made this in Contact. Let's have a look here. Here's Contact. And let's see, I'm going to play, let's turn everything off for a minute. Here's my tabla sound. I'm going to go down and shut everything off so that we don't have to, you see what the process I went through to make it. Okay, so hopefully this is just the sound on its own now. Oh. Let's see what we've got problem there. Sorry, bear with me people, because I'm sure I'll figure it out in a second. Right, that's probably what the problem is. Okay, so there you go, that's the sample. Hang on, got lots of things going on here, I'm trying to show you, so I'm going to shut them off quickly. Okay, well, let's shut it down here. Back to the beginning again. I'll tell you what all these things are. Okay, so there's my original sample that I just showed you before. I've taken it in here, just put it across the key group. The first thing I'm going to do, most synthesizers, all synthesizers really, have a glide function, and this is basically when you overlap two notes, one will bend to the other one, and it will bend as fast as you decide, depending on the speed of the knob you select it with. What I always do, is to add that to a bass sound. So here, if I just play two notes, you see how they go whoop 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 whoop? It's kind of like joining them together. A bit like if you're playing a bass guitar, you see a lot of them go, it's sliding the note up and down. And it's just one way of getting a bit of extra movement to it. So that's the first thing I do. Next, I'm going to put a low pass filter on, and that is essential for getting a bit of sound to it. So now this is right at the bottom. Nothing. And here it is. Right, now what's attached to this is an envelope, which you go down here. Is this one here. It's a very fast little short envelope, and it's just adding that little punch to the front. That becomes very useful later on, you'll see why. Now, when you right click in Contact, you'll see down here Learn MIDI Controller, which I won't change it. And basically if you do that and then you turn the knob on your keyboard, look, it hooks it up. It's really simple, it takes 1 second. So now, this is something that I can't stress to you enough. Everybody's been showing you how to program all these various things into bass and stuff, but the really good bass sounds that I've ever made, I've either played on a keyboard live with the filters, me moving them live, or like this, you can see. See what I mean? I can make my own little shapes. So now that I've got it all set up, I will add basically a chorus pretty much every time here. That just stickens out the top end of it and gives it a bit of a wider sound. Okay, so let's move on to an actual bass line sound. Let's have a look here. Oh no, there's one more thing I want to show you. these are some of the other bass sounds that I've just made live from this Pro 1 here. I'm just going to run through some of them, hopefully enjoy the sound of them a little bit. Let's have a look. Oh, hello. We've lost sound. Okay. I don't know why that was. Anyway, so then those are my rough bass sounds that I've just recorded here live into the computer, and I'm going to cut bits out of them to try and make a sort of bass line. This is just a really rough attempt at throwing it together the first time. I'm actually going to use it later on a bit more organised, but right now I just thought I'd just have a go. So. You can see that what I've tried to do when I'm recording them is make shapes that fit in time with 174, 75 BPM in their movement. So, you know, like a 1 beat sample or 2 1, blah, 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 you know, something that will fit that I can cut up later on, move into the place in the song where I really like it, and then hopefully it'll be useful. So that is just how I made the bass, but let's go to actually bass. So I've made a kind of a little bit of a track here. It's not finished, but we can get the idea. So what I've done is I've taken that tabla bass sound and I've made a little riff for it. Hopefully it's going to work. And you can hear my filter set. That's now I've taken some of those bits of the other bass sound and I've kind of overlaid them over the top. You might think that's a bit crazy, adding a bass sound on top of another bass sound, and sometimes it is a bad idea because they're just going to completely cancel each other out. But over the years I've found if you just experiment enough and also bust all of that together and slam it all together, so say there is some weird peaks that just get crunched out of it, which I'll show you my mix bus in a minute. Oh, by the way, I've turned everything off on the bass bus, so probably not going to sound so good, so I'm going to run through that quickly. I've split my bass. It's coming out over here, but it's not being sent to the master bus. It's just been sent nowhere for the minute, and then I've sent it off to 2 groups here. The first group, let's have a listen to that, is just the sub end of the bass. Oh yeah, let's have this on. This first plugin here is Fab Filter. Hard to see up there, I'm afraid, but have a look at it. Use it over here. Right, now what that is doing is cutting all of the top end information off. So all I've got here is everything below 130 Hertz. So it's just going to be the sub. This is just going to be the sub channel, and I'll have control over it, over the whole thing. Now this is virtual bus compressors. It's from Digital. I buy all their software because I just think that they really think about the sonics a lot more than. They're not just writing algorithms just to do sort of bog standard compression. They're trying to give a real sound to it, and not necessarily a copy of any old bit of gear, but something that's a sort of mixture of the principles of analog gear, but with the modern sort of take on it, so you get a lot of level. So I'm using that to compress the sub, keep it under control in case some notes jump out too much. And then here, this is just a saturator, soft tube. I'm just using a tiny bit of it just to beef it up. So let's go back now. Really round and fat, and like now I know I've got really solid bass in my track. I'm good to go. So now the second bus that I'm operating here is the top end of the bass, and what I've done again is the same thing. It's a Fab Filter cut. So let's have a look, and it's cutting in this case 290, I think like it says. It's not quite overlapping the sub. I've got a bit of a gap here, which I'm quite pleased about because that's where the snare is going to slot into the mix, so I don't mind that too much. So let's see now. what I've done is I've saturated it quite a lot. So I'm just kind of basically mangling it a bit there, getting it all kind of squared off. Then I can't even read what that is, so let's just load it and see what it is. I've got a Bristol in here, which is another one of these simulator plugins, simulating a channel strip. And this WOW plugin here is a filter, which in a minute I'll show you how I can use that to add even more crazy modulation. This gate is on because this channel is getting really noisy, so I'm just gating it. Then I've got my compressor again, the virtual bus compressor. Let's hope that pops up, maybe it won't. Doing a bit, oh, there it is. Not amazing settings going on here, it's just like a fast attack and a slightly slower decay. It's just to iron out any peaks, because if you're doing all this filtering and stuff, some notes are going to jump out at you. This is just going to kind of try and squash it all back together again. And then I've got another EQ, this time, if it wants to come up. There it is. It is taking the top off it. That I do sometimes on bass sounds, because I don't think the really high information is going to do a lot of good, and anything above like 8K is just generally going to make it sound a bit scratchy. I want the whole bass to have power in the mix, so I often just do that. Seems to add a bit more weight to the whole thing. In a sampler, I always used to use a low pass filter, just a little bit down from the top on a bass sound, for the same reason, just to clear out the top end. And then finally, I've got filter freak, which you will see when it's playing is just making a shape of the filter. Let's have a look at that. It's just set on a threshold, so when it hits the threshold, it sets off this little amp envelope here. So the whole thing all together is like this. See that moving up and down with the notes. It's basically just starting really low and bassy and then opening out every time there's a hit. But it's adding more shape, really. You know, like when I was showing you the frequency display before, and the more shapes you can make and everything, the more dynamic you can create in every sound, the more space you're going to get at the end of the day. So, right, let's have a look at what I'm doing in terms of here. This is the sub channel. I'm not sending it any effects, but something that I always do, because this is just a mono sample we started with here. And I'm just going to add a reverb and also a chorus to the top end, not the bottom end, because you really want to have mono bass, like Charlie spoke about earlier on, and I'll show you a little diagram of why that is later on. So basically this is a way of just affecting only the middle and top end of the bass. Right, so let's see, I've got another part to this bass here, which is those sounds I was playing before, and I've added them in, so this is the final result. You get the idea now, and a bit of drums. Alright, so that's my bass. I'm going to come back in a minute and talk about sounds, but let's go back to my little PowerPoint show.